Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. What we're about to discuss today is something that many believed would never happen. For years, the narrative coming out of Moscow was unwavering, confident, and defiant. The message was clear. The operation was progressing according to plan. Objectives were being achieved, and Russia remained firmly in control. But now, something has shifted in a way that is sending shockwaves through political circles, military analysts, and global observers alike. Reports and discussions emerging from Russia's own political arena suggest that cracks are no longer hidden behind closed doors. When members of the State Duma began openly questioning the direction, the cost, and the outcome of the war, it signals a moment of profound transformation. Even if no formal declaration of defeat has been made, the tone itself can reveal more than any official statement. For a long time, the Kremlin's messaging was tightly controlled. Public discourse remained disciplined. Any admission of failure would have been seen as politically unthinkable. Yet when lawmakers publicly debate whether objectives are unattainable or whether the strategy must fundamentally change, it carries enormous weight. This moment matters because of what it represents psychologically. Wars are not lost only on battlefields. They are lost when confidence erodes, when narratives collapse, and when leadership can no longer convincingly argue that victory is within reach. The war in Ukraine was initially framed as swift and decisive. Early expectations suggested rapid gains and limited resistance. But as the conflict dragged on month after month, the reality became far more complex and costly than anticipated. Military campaigns stretched far beyond initial timelines. Sanctions reshaped the economic landscape. Casualty figures mounted. Equipment losses became harder to conceal. International isolation deepened. Each of these elements created cumulative pressure inside Russia itself. When parliamentary voices begin echoing public frustration, it is rarely accidental. Political systems do not shift tone overnight without reason. Lawmakers tend to reflect either growing public concern, elite disagreement, or both. One of the most striking elements of this development is that it challenges the aura of inevitability that surrounded the war effort. For years, the leadership projected certainty. President Vladimir Putin maintained that strategic objectives would be met and that Western support for Ukraine would eventually fracture. But endurance works both ways. Ukraine continued resisting. Western alliances remained intact. Military aid continued flowing. The expectation that time would automatically favor Moscow did not unfold as clearly as predicted. Inside Russia, economic adjustments were made to absorb sanctions. Industries were redirected, trade partnerships shifted eastward, yet the strain has been real. Inflation pressures, workforce disruptions, and defense spending burdens have quietly reshaped daily life. When members of parliament begin to acknowledge that original goals may not be achievable under current conditions, it signals recognition that the strategic environment has fundamentally changed. Some analysts argue that what we are witnessing is not a sudden admission of defeat, but a recalibration. Language evolves before policy does. Public debate opens space for eventual negotiation, compromise, or restructuring of objectives. Still, symbolism matters. In political systems where unity has been emphasized above all else, even limited dissent stands out dramatically. The Kremlin has historically maintained firm control over messaging. State media reinforced themes of resilience and inevitable success, but prolonged wars test even the strongest narratives. Battlefield realities play a central role in shaping these conversations. Frontline dynamics have fluctuated, gains and losses have alternated. However, the anticipated decisive breakthrough never materialized in the way early rhetoric suggested it would. This creates a dilemma. Continuing the war indefinitely risks further economic and military strain. Ending it without clear victory risks domestic perception challenges. For lawmakers to publicly discuss whether the war's objectives are realistic is to acknowledge that the cost-benefit equation may no longer favor continuation in its current form. Internationally, this development is being watched carefully. Western governments see signs of fatigue.
Strategic planners analyze whether political openness inside Russia could signal future negotiations. At the same time, caution is necessary. Parliamentary debate does not automatically equal official surrender. Political systems can absorb criticism while maintaining core strategies. But perception drives markets, diplomacy, and alliances. Even the suggestion that the war may not end in Russia's favor alters calculations across Europe and beyond. Another key dimension is morale. Soldiers on the front lines pay attention to signals from home. When political leaders project unity and determination, it reinforces endurance. When uncertainty seeps into official discussions, it can ripple outward. Public opinion inside Russia has evolved over time. Initial patriotic rallies gave way to quieter concern as mobilizations expanded and personal connections to the conflict deepened. The war's length has changed its character. What was once framed as a limited operation has become a prolonged and grinding confrontation. When political leaders start adjusting language, it often reflects recognition that public patience has limits. There is also the question of international alliances. Russia sought to demonstrate that Western unity would fracture under economic pressure. Yet organizations like NATO not only remained cohesive, but expanded cooperation. This prolonged alignment complicated Moscow's strategic assumptions. Meanwhile, Ukraine adapted militarily. Advanced systems, training programs, and intelligence coordination improved its defensive and offensive capabilities. Every additional month of war reshaped the balance of power. Inside the Russian political system, debates may now center on sustainability. Can the economy continue supporting current defense expenditures? Can manpower levels be maintained without further mobilization waves? Can public support remain steady? These are not minor questions. They strike at the core of state capacity. Some observers interpret parliamentary admissions as groundwork for a negotiated settlement. Public acknowledgement that the situation is difficult can prepare citizens for compromise. Others warn that such discussions could be tactical, intended to manage expectations rather than concede defeat. The phrase, "the war is lost," carries enormous weight. Officially declaring such a conclusion would represent a historic shift. But even without formal words, tone and framing can reveal changing realities. Leadership narratives often evolve gradually. What began as cautious acknowledgement of challenges can eventually transform into policy change. The broader geopolitical implications are immense. A Russian setback would alter European security architecture for decades. Energy markets would recalibrate, defense spending priorities would shift, alliances would solidify or expand. Domestically, the political consequences could be profound. War has long been tied to national identity and leadership legitimacy. If lawmakers now suggest that objectives were miscalculated or unattainable, it invites deeper scrutiny of strategic decision-making. History shows that prolonged wars often reshape political landscapes at home. Public trust, economic stability, and elite unity all come under pressure. This moment may represent an inflection point. It does not necessarily mean immediate withdrawal or surrender, but it signals recognition that the trajectory envisioned at the beginning no longer aligns with present realities. Wars of attrition test endurance more than ambition. For Russia, the challenge has been sustaining momentum under intense international scrutiny and economic restriction. For Ukraine, the challenge has been survival against a larger power. For the global community, the challenge has been managing escalation risks. When parliamentarians speak candidly about outcomes, they often reflect conversations already happening behind closed doors. Elite consensus is rarely shattered publicly without internal debate reaching a critical stage. Whether this development leads to negotiations, strategic shifts, or intensified efforts remains uncertain, but the psychological barrier has been crossed. Admitting difficulty is not the same as admitting defeat, yet it moves the discussion closer to that territory. The world is watching carefully because moments like this rarely come without consequence. Political language shapes reality. If Russian lawmakers continue voicing concerns, it may indicate a broader recalibration of national strategy. However, if the system closes ranks again and reasserts unified messaging, it could signal that internal debate has limits. In either case, the mere possibility that Parliament acknowledged the war's failure marks a historic development. The unthinkable is not always loud. Sometimes it begins quietly, with a shift in tone, a hesitant admission, a question raised in an official chamber. From there, momentum can build, or it can be contained, but once spoken, doubt cannot be fully erased. This is why the moment matters. It reveals that even the most centralized systems are not immune to prolonged strain. It shows that wars reshape not only borders, but political discourse itself. And it reminds us that narratives of inevitability are fragile. Whether this leads to peace talks, strategic escalation, or internal political change remains to be seen. But one thing